Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of TORAH Talk Weekly Parsha with Rav Yitzchak Michaelson from the Holy Land. This week's Parsha Shelach Lecha. Rabbi, welcome back.
Yeah.
Good to have you back.
It's good to be here.
I kind of got tongue-tied there for a second, so I was looking for a knob, and I couldn't find my knob. I was like, where'd it go? It's attached to the board. It's never moved. My brain.
At least you didn't have to say "Bahalotecha."
Yeah, I know, right? That's definitely one of the harder ones for sure. So yeah.
Although it is Bahalotecha. Well, let's see. We're a week ahead of you, so I think we're caught up. I think you guys did Bahalotecha yesterday.
Okay.
In the U.S., and we did Shelach yesterday. So Shelach or Shelach Lecha would be the portion that we would be coming up for you in Shabbat coming up. So at least I'm good with all of you in the U.S. today.
That works.
Doing Shelach Lecha. So,
all right.
So Shelach or Shelach Lecha, which means send or send for yourself, is from Numbers chapter 13, verse 1 through 15:41. And, of course, it's the famous Parsha that starts off, send for yourself. And it's talking about the spies that go into the land.
Right.
Where you have Yoshua and Caleb that go in with the 10 others and go to spy out the land. And then they come back carrying the very big fruits of the land, the massive fruits of the land. And of course, the majority of them present the negative report. Many different opinions on that. Many different opinions on what the sin is. One of the main opinions is that the sin was speaking Lashon Hara against the land. My wife and I talked a little bit about that over Shabbat, in the idea that Lashon Hara can take on many different aspects. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that you're speaking badly against somebody else. It could be that you're speaking badly against yourself, or it could be, in this case, speaking badly against the land of Israel. And of course, when you think about the fact that you're speaking against something that's considered holy, so that the land of Israel has a certain level of kedusha to it, a certain level of holiness, that would be one of the main reasons that's brought. That, in other words, Hashem said something is holy, you're speaking against that thing that's holy. Carry that over into human beings, and we're talking about the fact that Hashem says, be holy like I am holy. I think I mentioned this on one of the previous shows, that we often look at that. When it says, be holy as I am holy, we see it as somehow Hashem saying to us that we need to do something in order to be holy. That's very wrong thinking. I think in many ways it almost has a Christian kind of thought process to it, because really what he's saying in that is that you are holy, so be holy. It's not like be holy, and so to be holy you have to do this, 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 and this. You have to keep the 613 mitzvot. You have to keep the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, and then after you do all those things, then you'll be holy. No, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is you are holy, now act like it. You don't become holy by doing those things. You're already holy. Now show it by doing those things, if that makes sense. So that takes on a greater that really drives home the point at how important it is to be careful about the speech that you use when Hashem calls something holy. So if he's saying that we are holy, when you're speaking against somebody who's created in the image of God, you're speaking against something that's already considered holy, and that carries even more weight in that situation. So,
right. I find it interesting that when they came back with the report, they didn't go to Moses and give him the report. They were like telling all the people, like instilling the fear in everybody, which to me would seem like it'd be more definitely like something like Lashon Hara, because you're actually involving other people and listening to your report as well. So, and in essence,
Yeah.
that's kind of the same thing as what you're saying, right?
Well, yeah, and of course, when you do that, there's kind of an agenda that it's attached to that.
Right.
Because generally what happens is, if you have something against something, or you have something against someone, generally what you do is you're kind of trying to rally the troops around you. Let's say you have an issue with somebody out there, and you want everybody else to feel the way you do. You're not going to go to that person and say, you did this, this, and this, and if you don't take care of this, I'm going to go tell everybody. No, you go tell everybody first, because you want them to feel like you do. You want them to be upset with that person. You want to belittle that person so that everybody's already on your side. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why they did that, as opposed to going to Moshe originally. The other thing is, and I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this, but if you go in and you look at that, sorry, let me just take care of this. If you look at it, the story, I always think it's very interesting that Moshe gives them sort of specific instructions on how they're to go into the land and spy it out. That he basically gives them directions. He gives them almost like a roadmap and says, go this way, go up to the mountain and look over the land and so forth. But if you look at it very carefully, they don't do that.
Right.
They don't go up to the mountain. They stay down in the valley.
They wanted to bring back proof. They wanted to prove to these people that they were coming back to, using evidence, so that when they saw the what they had brought back with the fruit, how big it was, and the scale of them is like, that was like their proof of the only evidence they could have brought back, rather than capturing one of them. So
yeah, I got you. But think about it from a perspective standpoint. When you're standing on a mountain, your perspective is different.
Right.
When you're looking down on something, I live on a mountain in Tzfat, we're the highest elevation of any inhabited city in Israel, at somewhere around, say, 930 meters, whatever. So when I look down, when I stand even on my street down below my house, if I walk down the little alleyway to the main street here, Rehov Keren HaYesod, and I look down, and just below is the old Tzfat cemetery where the Ari HaKadosh and many tzaddikim are buried. When I see people down there by the Ari's kever, by the burial site of the Ari HaKadosh, they don't look the same as that same person that asks me directions face to face on how to get to the Ari. My perspective is totally different. He doesn't look, when he's standing face to face with me and he's my height, let's say he's 6 feet tall, I'm looking at another person 6 feet tall. But when he goes all the way down the stairs and he's several hundred meters down below me, he doesn't look like he's 6 feet tall anymore.
That's true.
So I think there's a reason why Moshe Rabbeinu told them to go the way, because he wanted them to have a certain perspective. And maybe, I don't know if he was operating out of some, Ruach HaKodesh, that he had some understanding from Hashem that there was the potential for that to happen. But I think, if you think about it, that always pops out to me, that had they gone on the mountain on the path that he told them, that their perspective probably would have been different, and they wouldn't have seen the people as such giants, and they wouldn't see everything as so overwhelming as they did.
Right.
So
I think, what was the whole point of Moses renaming Yehoshua, but not giving everybody because that's something that really almost changes your identity or enforces what's being built. And so I've heard that one reason why he had done that before he left is because he kind of suspected ahead of time, based on the context of everything, that these other leaders were already scared and are already not wanting to go in to begin with, and thought maybe that Yehoshua would have fallen into their plot. But then again, Caleb didn't, and his name wasn't changed. So is there any significance as to why Moses actually changed his name?
So many different opinions. And of course, you got to go into the idea that it starts out giving the names of all the different people that are going in. It specifically names them one by name. It says in, I think it's in verse 16, that these are the names of the men which Moshe spent to spy out the land. And Moshe called Hoshea the son of Nun. And then you have the question of why the name was changed. So there's different opinions. According to the Talmud, Moshe basically renames him in preparation for the transfer of leadership, that he already knew that Hoshea was going to be the one that he was going to pass the mantle on to. And so knowing that, he was already preparing him in a way. And that was the main reason. I think it appears in, I want to say in the Talmud Bavli, in the Babylonian Talmud, in Sanhedrin 17a, where it talks about that. It talks about the idea that Moshe, talking about the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, and that Yehoshua would be the one to bring Israel into the land. And so that would be the main reason that I would think that the majority opinion is that he already knew that he was going to be the one that he was going to pass the leadership on to.
Gotcha.
And that's why. So moving ahead from there, so we know that some of the spies die, and then of course the people in general are informed about their own punishment as a result of going along with everything. And then we see the laws of the mincha, the meal offering, and then we have the law of separating challah and the dough offering, and the communal sin offering are stated. Different offerings are brought up. And then finally, at the end, we have the final aliyah, because we have seven, there are 7 aliyot when people are called up to the Torah. And the seventh aliyah talks about the individual sin offering. And then we have the incident of the man who gathered the sticks on Shabbat, which is always a very interesting story that people bring up, and they wonder, come on, really, the guy was just carrying sticks. What's the big deal? And he gets stoned. And talks about his punishment. And then we have finally the mitzvah of tzitzit, of wearing the fringes on the 4 corners of the garment. So, Interestingly enough, I always like to talk about the idea of juxtaposition, and the idea that sometimes we see things that seemingly may seem like out of place, like why does it fit in here? Why do we see it spoken of in this particular spot, and then right after it we see something that also doesn't seem like it connects, but it really does connect when you think about it. And this is one of those issues, I think. The Torah does not identify who this person was. However, the Talmud does in several places. And it's supported by some of the commentaries, specifically the Ben Ishchai brings and supports this concept, and so does, speaking of the Ari HaKadosh, the Holy Ari, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria Ashkenazi, who really, when we follow Kabbalah, Lurianic Kabbalah, it's called Lurianic Kabbalah after him, the Ari, who was here in Tzfat. And he also supports this idea of who this person was. And do you know who the person was?
Not right offhand.
All right, Salafchad.
Okay, gotcha.
Now Salafchad, I don't remember how people pronounce that in English, to be honest with you. That could be a tongue twister for you, like Bahalotacha.
Oh yeah, Salafchad. Yeah, I've got I usually do better when I don't try to read.
Zalofa. I don't know how they pronounce it. So it's
Salafchad.
I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to say it other than in Hebrew. It's Salafchad. So for those people that don't have no clue what I'm talking about, Salafchad, you're talking about the person whose daughters came to Moshe Rabbeinu when the land was being apportioned to the different tribes and came and said, our father died in the desert, and they wanted to have a portion, and Moshe didn't know what to do, and he went to Hashem, and Hashem agreed to give the daughters of Tzalafchad a portion. That opens up for us, the idea of that story actually opens up the idea that this was Tzalafchad, because one of the things that the daughters say was that he died in his sin in the wilderness, or in the Bamidbar, in the desert. So it opens up, and then the Talmud goes in and speaks about this a little bit further, speaks about it. Here's another interesting thing when we talk about those things. Tzalafchad, and this idea of him being the one who was gathering the sticks or gathering wood and then being stoned to death, we often automatically look at these things in a negative light, in a negative connotation, as we would, let's say, with the situation of Nadav and Avihu. We see Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, the high priest, and how they brought strange fire. They brought incense, and they came to Hashem, and the fire came out from the Mishkan and consumed them. And there are different opinions, and I'm sure you've read them or listened to the different opinions where they bring Nadav and Avihu as being these elevated souls, as being very noble. And yet they were killed not because, like in other words, you could say they had noble intention, but their actions were wrong.
Right.
Okay, so there are opinions about that. There are opinions that say that Nadav and Avihu were very big tzaddikim. And yet here we have these very big tzaddikim that are consumed by Hashem because their actions were wrong.
It was like the king who offered incense and became a leper, right?
Yes. Yeah. That same kind of thing. So we don't always have to look at these things in a negative light. And Tzalafchad could potentially be one of those issues, because there is an opinion that Tzalafchad actually did this for noble reasons. Now, he was still wrong. His actions were wrong. His actions were improper. But there is an opinion brought that, in talking about like the Ben Ish Chai, who brings a commentary to the Gemara, when he talks about this and he supports the notion that this was Tzalafchad, it's this idea that further in the Gemara, in Sanhedrin, and then also in the Midrash Yalchut Shimoni, it not only identifies Tzalafchad, but it says that what he did was that he committed this act of gathering the sticks, knowing that it was a violation, but doing it for noble intentions. That basically what he did was he transgressed the Shabbat in order to be punished, to teach Bnei Israel, the rest of the people, the importance of Shabbat observance. In other words, he took upon himself to do this, to be punished in order to show the rest of Israel, the rest of the Jewish people in the desert, how important keeping Shabbat was. So in other words, they're saying that his intentions were noble, but his action was improper. And so just like Nadav and Avihu, who certainly there are the opinions that they were very high tzaddikim, and they had the right intention in wanting to worship Hashem, but their actions were wrong, and as a result, they still needed to suffer the consequences. Excuse me. So the Ari, like the Ben Ish Chai, also taught about this. And there's a very famous story about this. There's a very famous story that's brought later on in Masechet Shabbat in the Talmud. In Masechet Shabbat, I think in 150, side B, it tells a story about a very pious man. And this very pious man is walking around his property. And he's got a wall around the property, like a stone wall. Excuse me. He's got a stone wall around his property, and he happens to be walking on Shabbat. Obviously, Masechet Shabbat. He's walking on Shabbat, and he sees that there is a breach in the wall, in his stone wall. And for a moment, he stops, And he makes a mental note. He doesn't say anything out loud. He obviously doesn't write anything down, but he just thinks in his mind, I got to make a note that I need to take care of this wall after Shabbat. And then he gets upset with himself. And why does he get upset? He thinks to himself, how in the world could I have such thoughts on Shabbat? Why would I even consider thinking about work on Shabbat? It's like the guy's beating himself up over the idea that he just had a thought. Not that it's not like he picked up rocks and tried to fix the hole on Shabbat. It's not like he spoke it out and, or called out to, his wife or to his kids or to workers or whatever and said, oh, by the way, we have to do this. So we know one of the things that we're not supposed to do is we're not supposed to have discussions. When I go to other people's homes or I have people at my house for Shabbat, you're very careful about not discussing mundane things, not discussing business. This guy just kind of takes it to the next level. And the idea that he felt so bad that he even thought something business related. It says that a miracle occurred and that a caper tree grew right in that spot and filled in the breach in his wall. And they said, why is it such a great miracle? The story talks about the idea that a caper tree basically supplies the caper berries are edible, the leaves are edible. I think even the bark is edible on the tree. So it says that that it was a great miracle for the guy, and that basically that his family were able to sustain themselves from that tree. Because like I said, that not only the tree's fruit is edible, but its bark and the leaves are as well. So you got to think about that. Who thinks like that this guy has such, great intentions? So then the Ari talks about this. The Ari talks about this story in the Gemara, and he talks about this very pious man that we're talking about. And the Ari says that basically this very pious man that we're mentioning in Shabbat 150 has a spark of tzalaf chad in him. That's what he says, the Ari. Says the guy has a spark of tzalaf chad. That basically through his pious act of being so upset with himself that he would even think about something business related on Shabbat, that basically he helped to rectify the error, rectify the mistake made by tzalaf chad when he desecrated Shabbat. And that basically what the Ari is trying to teach us is that when a person seeks to rectify any kind of mistake, when he tries to bring tikkun, when we say mitakein, to repair or to correct, that he needs to go to the furthest opposite extreme that he was at. So here's this guy going to the opposite extreme of something, and as a result, that's the thing that rectifies. And so this was the rectification of tzalaf chad's mistake. And then this man went so far as to refrain from fixing it even after Shabbat. So he decided that he made a great error, and then he took great pains in the fact that after Shabbat he wasn't going to fix it at all. And this is the reason that the Ari brings this whole idea, and then it explains that he was given this great miracle and he was rewarded with a caper tree. And you want to hear what a caper tree is in Aramaic?
What is it?
Tzalaf chad.
That's funny.
Tzalaf chad. 2 words. 1 caper. Tzalaf chad. Which also spells the name of tzalaf chad. This is what the Ari brings. And so the man was supported by this tree, and the Ari said to symbolize the fact that he was sustained by the merit of doing such a great deed in basically rectifying the sin of tzalaf chad. And so I said it's interesting that we see these ideas of a juxtaposition, right? So what's the idea of this juxtaposition? Why do we see Tzalaf Chad in the story. And what happens? What's the very next thing we see? Because the story of Tzalaf Chad, or the story of the man who was carrying the sticks, who we now know is Tzalaf Chad, based on what we see in the Torah. The daughter is saying he died in a sin. Several places in the Talmud, and we see it in Masechet Shabbat and Shabbat 96b, and in other places. And of course, like I said, the Ben Ish Chai and the Ari HaKadosh. So there's another interesting connection, and because right after Tzalaf Chad is when we have the mitzvah of Tzitzit, which we see at the very end of the Parsha in Numbers chapter 15, verse 37 through verse 41, I believe, is the end. So now the question is there a connection between the two? Is there a connection between this person, Tzalaf Chad, who is carrying the sticks, and this idea of the keeping the mitzvah of wearing tzitzit, of having the fringes on the corners of our garments? So there's also in what's called the Tana Devei Eliyahu, and Tana Devei Eliyahu in chapter 26 tells us that after this tragic incident with Tzalaf Chad, that Hashem basically explained to Moshe Rabbeinu how the mistake came to be, because the one who gathered these twigs was not mindful of the Shabbat. And we understand that throughout the week, in a regular week, other than Shabbat, in the regular week, like I do every morning and like most Orthodox Jews do every morning, we put tefillin. We put on the tefillin, on the arm tefillin, the shel yad, it's called the shel yad, and the shel rosh. We have the little leather boxes. I'm sure most people that are listening understand what those are. We have the shel yad that goes on our arm, right, and it gets wrapped around in a certain way on our hand. And then we have the shel rosh that's on our heads. And that tefillin is meant to remind us of our responsibilities to Hashem. It has different parshiot, the parshiot of the Shema in it. It has different parshiot in the shel yad and in the shel rosh. But it's meant to be a reminder to us of the responsibilities. It also, the shel yad points to the heart, and the head to our moach, to mochin, to our intellect. So it's the idea of both our intellect and both our heart related to our intellect and our emotions, which can be a whole show in itself to discuss that, on the holiness and the Kabbalistic connection to tefillin between our intellect and our emotions. But we do not wear tefillin on Shabbat. And so you could say that this person, as a result, we could say that Tzalaf Chad was not mindful of the Shabbat, and this led him to commit that offense. That could be another opinion. So the Tana Devei Eliyahu goes on to say that Hashem gave the mitzvah of tzitzit, which also serves to remind us of the mitzvot, because it says in Numbers chapter 15, verse 39, it shall constitute tzitzit for you, that you may see it and remember all the commandments of Hashem and perform them. And then Chazal teaches that the mitzvah of tzitzit is equal to all the other mitzvot combined. That's one of the opinions that's brought, that the idea of the mitzvah of tzitzit is equal to all the other mitzvot combined. And what is one of the other things that the Chazal teach is like that all the other mitzvot are combined into it, is Shabbat. They teach that tzitzit is one of those things where all the other mitzvot are combined in it, and they also teach that Shabbat is one of those things where all the other mitzvot are combined in it. So the mitzvah of tzitzit, of these wearing these fringes on the four corners of the garment, was given as a reminder to us to safeguard against violations of Shabbat, And if we're saying that Shabbat is also equivalent to all the other Torah commandments, then it's guarding us against violation of all the other commandments as well. So as a result of that, the section of Tzitzit appears in the Torah immediately following this incident of the man who desecrated Shabbat. And then if we go back and we think about that pious man in the story in the Gemara in 150b that made this momentary mistake, forgetting about Shabbat, which was the same cause of Salaf Chad sin, because you could say that he had this momentary lapse in his mind, that the pious man then corrected this by pledging not to repair the wall. And in that way, the Ari says he has had that spark and brought a tikkun and brought a repair to that. And by having a little bit of a spark of that, he brought rectification for that sin from before. So basically, what I'm bringing this for, and basically what I think the Ari and the Ben Ish Chai are trying to teach us through this, is that we have to try as much as we can to be conscious of and sensitive to the special sanctity of Shabbat, that it can't be just something that we think about starting late on Thursday, and then Friday people are running around and getting prepared, and women are cleaning their homes and preparing chalot, and the men are doing whatever they need to do, and then we come time to light the candles and so forth, and the women light the candles, and the family gets together and we have a meal, and everybody's doing whatever they're doing, and somehow we get caught up in other things, or we sit at our Shabbat table and somebody brings up a conversation that maybe we shouldn't be having. It takes away from the importance and the sanctity of Shabbat. When I see people posting about the idea that they can't wait until this bubble in time comes in, where they're going to set aside that 25 or the 26 hours, depending on how you observe, setting it apart. Basically, what it's meant to do, the tzitzit, is it's meant to be a reminder for us so that all through the day, we have this reminder of the sanctity of the Shabbat, and the awareness will then serve to protect us and help us to avoid making mistakes, and at the same time allowing us to gain the maximum benefit from the Kedusha of the Shabbat. Now, it goes even further than that, because one of the things that we know that the tzitzit does, we're told in a sense to gaze at it. The Torah tells us to gaze at the tzitzit. And when you look at the etymology of the word tzitzit itself comes from the root that means to peer or to gaze. It actually comes from that root. And this is actually, we see this in actually in a verse in Shir HaShirim, in Song of Songs, where it says in it's Song of Songs, chapter 2, verse 9, where it basically says, "My beloved is like the gazelle or a young deer. Behold, he was near the entire time, standing behind our wall, supervising from the windows." And then it says, "Metzitz min hacharkim," that he was peering through the lattices. He was peering through the windows. About lattice is what that means when it says hacharkim there. But the word is metzitz, which is from the same root of this idea tzitz, which really means to gaze. It can mean to peer. It has to do with gleaming, it's related to light and so forth, and gazing. When you think about it, since the whole concept behind the tzitzit, and we have the talit katan being the garment that we wear, in this, I don't know, I wear a talit katan under my shirt, and I have the tzitzit on it. And then when we do our tefillot in the morning at shacharit, in the morning prayers, this is a talit katan. We put on the talit gadol. We put on the bigger talit that also has tzitzit on it. And of course, we wear the talit on Shabbat morning as well when we do tefillot in Beit Knesset, or if you call it a shul or synagogue. As I said, if we know that the whole concept behind the tzitzit, whether you're wearing it on the talit katan or the talit gadol, is related to Hashem's providence, the idea of his constant supervision, and the idea that Hashem oversees everything that happens in the world, that Hashem is in everything, then we could say that it's appropriate that in the verse, or in this verse that I just read, that it is Hashem who is the one who is peering deeply into our souls through those lattices, through those windows and the lattices of the world. And when we reciprocate and look at the tzitzit, we then remember the providence. We remember the fact that Hashem is constantly supervising everything, and that Hashem is in all things, and get reconnected to why we are here, what our purpose is, and why we do it, why we wear the tzitzit, why we put these garments on. And this is actually why the rabbis taught about the tchelet. Now, not everybody, you see different people with different tzitzit, but if you see mine, you see that it has the blue thread, which is called the tchelet. And you see a lot of people, some people don't wear the tchelet, they don't wear the blue thread, because they don't know if they believe that the dye that we have for the blue is from the proper animal today, from the chelazon. There are different opinions as to where the ink came from.
But I think it's definitely something noted that techelet doesn't mean blue. It just, techelet has the characteristic of a blue color. And so a lot of Messianics, for example, they will actually put just any kind of blue thread in it and try to trump the Orthodox Jews who wear all white, and it's like because they think that the techelet it translates into the word blue, but that's not what it is. So it's like it's a thing, not a
blue
color.
Is kachol. Kachol is the Hebrew word for blue.
Right.
And you could say that maybe techelet might have a similar root to it, but the techelet really is more related to a type of blue than it is to blue itself. In other words, it has more of a connotation of the blue related to Shemayim, the blue related to the heavens. The blue that we see, that you could say sky blue, or a blue that you would see related to, there's one particular color that's mentioned in the Bible, lapis lazuli, which is one of the colors that could be related to the kisei hakavod, to the throne of glory. So, interestingly enough, techelet, that word techelet, and going back to the Messianic thing, I've seen that before, and it always makes me laugh, because not only do they think that just putting a blue string in there is, but they'll go to, like, I don't know, what are the places you go to in the U.S. for that kind of stuff, like
craft stores and stuff,
Marshalls, I don't know, where you would get like yarn or thread or whatever, one of those kind of places they go to, right. And they just get whatever kind of thread and think that they can tie tzitzit together, or they have their belt loop tzitzit, or they have, I don't know. I've seen all kinds of crazy things there.
The best argument that I ever heard, or well, it's not one I actually heard, it's one I actually kind of thought about myself, is, the critique, of course, is putting tzitzit or fringes on your belt loops really is just, it doesn't make sense. But more in line with what I'm thinking is, in biblical days, they didn't have T-shirts. They had, everything was square corner garments. Everything was. You wrapped it around you. Everything. Even the guys, when they had their, I don't know what you call the lower wrap around your lower part of the body, but when they would go to war, they would take it and fold it and tuck it, so to keep them, make it where they can run and stuff. So during that time, there was no such thing as a round garment. So put it on the four corners of your garment. In a way, their interpretation of it, well, that just means spread them evenly. If we have a round garment, then that's what we do. So I see their reasons for doing that part if they were to put them on a T-shirt or something like that.
Yeah. The only thing that you would say that might be rounded would be like the in the biblical times they would have worn something that would be kind of like called, I guess the closest thing you would call it in English would be like a bell dress kind of thing. It was like a long... It would have been the overgarment, a long garment, and like a longer version of a tunic. And one of the opinions is that the bottom would have been scalloped, so that you would have had this kind of like scalloped bottom.
Oh yeah.
That could appear as kanafayim, wings. So that would be the only thing that potentially would be round. But certainly they didn't have any kind of, they wouldn't have like tied tzitzit to a belt that they tied around their robe, which would be the modern day version of kind of doing belt loop tzitzit.
But the argument with that is they wouldn't have needed to, because they everything they had was four corner garments. So if they did find something else to put it in, then that would be like almost intentionally disobeying the law. But nowadays, by seeing somebody do that and having them like in their evenly spread on their T-shirt tails or whatever the case may be, that doesn't seem like that's an intentional disobedience of the law, because there's so many other options now, and there wasn't back then. So
I know, but the truth is that if you claim to be, all right, so let's unpack this for a minute with the few minutes that we have left. Okay. Yeah. So let's say you're a person that's messianic. Let's say you're a person that believes in Jesus, right? Obviously, if you're messianic, they believe in Jesus in whatever form. They'll call him Yeshua or whatever. Right. They don't, they don't like calling him Jesus, but I won't. I call him Jesus. That's it. I'm not calling him any other name. So I don't believe there's any proof that anything was written in Hebrew at the time. So to give him a Hebrew name is sort of ridiculous. But okay.
Right.
All right, so you're messianic and you believe in Jesus. I could make the argument, just the opposite of what they do. I could make the argument that from everything that I read in the Greek Testament, I could make the argument for, instead of Paul, who I believe hijacked the movement, and I'm not saying I believe this. I'm using this as an argument. Let's say this is what I believe. I could argue that Paul is the one who hijacked this movement, that Paul, instead of being a Pharisee, was not a Pharisee, and it was, in fact, Jesus was more likely to be a Pharisee than Paul was, because Paul was very anti-Pharisaical, and he was connected to the high priest, who was not a Pharisee, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees didn't get along back then. So it's more than likely that Paul was not a Pharisee and hijacked this movement. So then if you go back and you think that Jesus was a Pharisee, which I could make a stronger argument for, then he would never have had belt loop tefillin or tzitzit, belt loop tzitzit. He would have followed whatever the law was. He would have followed whatever the Torah was. So to now claim to be believers in Jesus, and to then say, okay, well, our garments are a little bit different, or to say, well, you know what, we're going to be like Paul, and we're just going to hijack things. You're doing just the opposite of the person you claim to follow. Because the person you claim to follow, like we said at the beginning, if we make the argument that he was more of a Pharisee than Paul could ever hope to be, and he never saw himself as divine, he never saw himself as as a divine figure, and was only a person that was trying to bring a movement to return people to Hashem, and wrongly was convinced by people that he was the Messiah, because I don't want anybody to mistake what I'm saying here. I'm not supporting by any way, means, or anything saying that that Jesus is right. I'm just kind of giving you the both sides of the story here. I'm just saying that then people are following the wrong person. You're basically by making up your own way, by making up these tzitzit, by putting your own type of thread on it and saying that you're fulfilling it, you're more following a person who had nothing to do with Torah and nothing to do with Pharisaical Judaism, and going against the person who you claim to follow. That's what I would say. That would be my argument on that.
Okay.
But if we go back to this word techelet, it actually, when we just discussed this idea of providence and this constant supervision, and the idea that tzitzit is meant for you to observe it and peer at it and gaze at it in order to reconnect, that in that verse in Shir HaShirim 2:9 where it talks about peering through the lattices, and we're saying that Hashem in that pasuk, in that verse, we're saying that we could say that this is Hashem who is the one peering deeply into the souls through the lattices of the world, and that we reconnect through the tzitzit. That when we look at that word techelet, connected to that idea of the sky blue, like I talked about in Shemayim and so forth in the heavens, the color blue, the word techelet itself is identical with the word tachlit. And oftentimes you hear people say tachlis. I don't know if you've ever heard like Ashkenazi Jews say tachlis.
Yeah, what is that exactly?
Purpose.
Oh, purpose. Okay, gotcha. Interesting.
Tachlit.
Yeah.
So techelet is identical to the word tachlit, purpose. And what we say, that tzitzit, one of the things it is to show you purpose. So this is capitalized in a way on the double meaning, because the sages teach that techelet resembles or reminds one of the ocean, which resembles the sky, and the sky resembles what? The Kisei HaKavod. We see that in Sotah, in Masechet Sotah, in Sotah 17. This is one of the things it says, that techelet resembles the ocean resembles the sky, and the sky resembles the throne of glory. That's where I brought up that idea of the lapis lazuli connected to the Kisei HaKavod. And what color could the throne of glory possibly be? Well, if they were just referring to the color blue, the third illusion wouldn't make sense, because the blue of the techelet reminds us to raise our sights beyond the world if we wish to grasp the purpose, the tachlit, which is to become a throne for God's glory. We want to be connected to that. In other words, the sky blue techelet that we're talking about is supposed to point to a higher tachlit, to a higher purpose in life. And it reminds us that Hashem is above us at all times, and that his providence is constantly leading creation to the ultimate goal. And what is the ultimate goal? What is the ultimate purpose? Shabbat. Because what is ultimately going to happen when Mashiach comes? Ultimately, we're going to have the great Shabbat. This is why the Shabbat is also called Tachlit Shemayim Va'aretz, the purpose and goal for which heaven and earth were created. Okay.
Yep.
I don't know. Are we done?
We have still got 10 minutes if you want it.
Oh, okay. So
I always cut you short. I'm not going to cut you short this day. If we got extra time, I'm going to let you take it.
No, I don't know. It's just, so, I mean, think about that. The Sabbath is called, one of the things it's called is Tachlit Shemayim Va'aretz, the purpose and goal related to the heavens and the earth, related to Shemayim Ba'aretz, that it's the purpose that the heaven and earth were created for, is the Shabbat. And as an introduction to the teaching of the Ari, there's a great book on this that people who would want to learn about some of these things, like I was talking about tefillin, and if you want to learn about tzitzit, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, wrote some amazing books, and he wrote a book on tzitzit. I think it's called Tzitzit, A Thread of Light. Will give people a deeper insight and a deeper understanding on the teachings of the Ari. He wrote on tzitzit, he wrote on tefillin. Actually, one of the rabbis that I work with, and one of the rabbis that I learned with, was friends with Rabbi Kaplan for over 30 years. So definitely, if you want to get deeper into that and understand it further, I would definitely recommend Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's works on these.
Gotcha.
One of the most obvious things about tzitzit is the fact that they involve a commandment directly related to our clothing. You and I were just talking about that, about garments,
right?
About how they're attached and where they're attached and the four corners of the garments, so that they are not, when you think about it, they're not separated in a sense that tzitzit are not in and of themselves a mitzvah outside of being attached to clothing. Like when we're talking about tefillin are in and of themselves separate. I mean, you have tefillin, yes, you wear them on your body, but it's not attached to your clothing. Where the tzitzit, you're only fulfilling that mitzvah if it's attached to your clothing. And based on our conversation earlier, if you're attaching them properly to your garments. So if we understand the meaning of tzitzit, we have to explore the significance that clothing plays in our society.
Right.
We know from the very beginning that clothing played a big role. Why? Because Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, did not have clothes, and they were not ashamed. They didn't see themselves as naked. It wasn't until they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that they understood that they were naked and thought that was a bad thing. They didn't see it as a bad thing before.
Right. Hey,
so we have to understand. Yeah.
I want to throw something else out here, but I want to put it out now,
Okay.
because we are running out of time, and I don't want to throw it out to you at the last minute, and you wish you had time to explain it. So another argument on the round garments, putting tzitzit on a t-shirt or whatever, or on your pants, whether they're belt loose, but just, you get your round waist, right? And is that you're supposed to put the four corners of your garments, but the Torah does also talk about the four corners of the earth, and everybody knows the earth is not flat, and that it is round, but it still refers to the four corners, meaning evenly spread, basically. So with that said, that being applied to how the Messianics would use that interpretation, the four corners could be loose instead of strict. What would be a comment on that?
So I'm trying to understand. Are you trying to say that by saying that the earth is round and not flat, and so not a square garment, that this would allow them, because they're loops around, they're allowed to attach them to the loops?
Well, no, just the idea of the modern day garments aren't square like they were in biblical times. And so if the command is to attach the fringes to the four corners of your garment.
I'm going to give you a very simple answer. It's probably not the answer you want.
Okay.
But it's going to be a simple one.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. And the simple one is this. There are many different laws that we have, specifically when we're talking about Shabbat, specifically when we're talking about tefillin, specifically when we're talking about tzitzit, specifically when we're talking about shechita, shechting an animal, that we're given these laws in the Torah, but we're not given details,
right,
on how to perform them. And the only way that we're given details and understanding how to do it is through the oral Torah, through the Talmud.
That's actually a great answer, and I'm very happy that you said that.
So the idea is that when people come to me and they say I keep Shabbat, I say to them, really, how do you keep Shabbat? What do you base that on? Because when you read about Shabbat in the Torah, it doesn't give you details on how to keep Shabbat. I know how to keep Shabbat because I study the Talmud, because I know what the halachot are, because I study the halachot of Shabbat, what I'm allowed to do, what I'm not allowed to do, in very fine detail. I understand what the halachot are. So when somebody says to me they keep the Shabbat, I ask them if they understand what that means. So to now say that you understand, it's if we go into the idea that if you walk into any messianic place today, messianic church, okay, you're going to go in there and you're going to go in there, let's say on a Shabbat morning, and you're going to see people there with talit gadol and with kippot and all these things. And that guy, whoever he is, the pastor that calls himself a rabbi, is going to stand up there. And the first thing he's going to do with the kippah and his talit gadol on is going to start bashing the rabbis and saying how the Talmud doesn't apply today and the Torah doesn't apply today, all at the same time that he's wearing a kippah and talit gadol that you would only know about if you studied the oral Torah.
Right.
So you're either doing one of two things. You're either misappropriating something that doesn't belong to you, or you're doing exactly what you're being accused of doing, which is trying to attract Jewish people by wearing Jewish trappings.
Right.
It's either one or the other. Because you can't say that, okay, I wear a kippah and I wear a talit gadol and I wear the fringes because I'm connected to my Jewishness and I believe that he was the Jewish Messiah and I want to follow the Torah, and then in the same breath get up there and bash the very rabbis who in many cases laid down their lives in order for you to be able to have that opinion today. But we would not know about wearing kippah. We would not know about fringes. We would not know about tefillin. We would not know about Shabbat. We would not know about how to properly shecht an animal. We wouldn't know any of those things without the halacha that's brought down in the Talmud.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So,
yep. Very true. Good answer.
I thought you were looking for a much more
no.
I was
no, not at all. Because I mean, if I didn't believe in the validity, the active validity of the oral law of the Talmud, then I probably would have wanted something else. But I actually totally believe that it's absolutely that would be something that they've never considered for sure. Even if they had, they reject the oral law anyway. So, but I don't. So that's why I was like, that's the answer I was looking for actually, and I'd never heard a response to it yet because I've never really asked the question. So,
okay.
So very good, very good. All right, well that does wrap us up. We're about out of time now. So, Rabbi, thank you so much for taking the time to do this on a weekly basis. I know you're very busy as it is. And tell your lovely wife, whom I will be glad to see in the morning for you guys. Women's World, you can, if y'all are tuning in, I'm gonna say it here. Guys can watch it, but you can't comment. This is a ladies' turf, so we'll keep that respectable that way. So definitely tune in to Leah Michaelson's Women's World with Julie M. Taylor as the host. So
I highly recommend it.
Very, very, yeah, me too. It's a really great show. I've been learning a lot from it myself. That's pretty cool. It's really funny, Rob, because they'll be of course, from the moment we get ready to go live, I turn my mic down and I'm down the entire show. And so many times it's like they say something now, and I try to iterate, like, oh, that's right, and I'm like, oh, I'm talking to myself. So
bite your tongue,
I do. I'm glad the mics were down, so that's good.
Yeah, I actually put the headphones on and listen to something else while she's doing the show with you, so I don't have that problem.
Because she'll want to insert.
No, so that I don't have to pass her notes and say, "Oh, you should say this." Or
right. That's smart. She
said she already has some of my notes.
Oh, that's funny. Well, she does a great job. I mean, you could.
Well, I mean, you got to understand something. We talk about a lot of these things over Shabbat. So
that's awesome.
A lot of times you hear overlap.
Yes.
Because I'm sharing things with her, and then she makes notes.
In a different way.
Right. She just ties it in a different way.
That's the beauty of good teaching. You can take something and repackage it, and it has this just as dynamic of an impact, but can convey something almost completely different at the same time. So it's really cool.
Well, that's the whole point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great job. So, okay, well, guys, thank you so much. Rav, stay on the phone with me if you don't mind, and I'll. But as for everybody else, it was good having y'all here. Thank you guys for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and turn on notifications so that you're alerted. If you're not getting notifications and you have turned them on, then find me on Facebook and follow me there because I always put updates, what's going on Facebook. So, all right, well, with all that said, Rabbi, once again, thank you so much, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon.
Be well, everyone.
Shalom, shalom.
ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה